as forming part of the compensation package. Secondly, the issue of remunerating Mr Dundee for his work. So, for example, anything that's not travel or acquisition costs associated with the project. And finally, just an opportunity for all of us to tie up any loose ends that may be remaining that we think might be useful finalising.
Sure, I think it's good that we lay our objective and what our interests are. And as we said before, our number one interest is diversity. Right? And encouraging at all times to get as many samples as possible. So as such, what we've done is we've put together a structure that, yes, it will cover expenses. It will pay on a per sample basis with heavy bonuses, so each stage of the way. And I think Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that our compensation package actually, because of the nature of this project, expenses we'd like to incorporate just as a general part of it, actually, the per sample figures, the upfront payment, all of those things. It's not really in the interest of our client to be communicating Mr. Dundee about expenses and costs along the way. They'd like us to incorporate that into the overall figures. And that just has to do with the sensitive nature of what we're dealing with here. We'd rather just not be involved as much degree as possible.
Okay. Mr. Dundee has actually given us some limited information as to what he believes the expenses will be. Of course, expenses being more fixed costs, whereas remuneration there's much more room to move. Had your client also given you information about the fixed cost of the expenses, or did you mean you'd rather not know about the specifics of the expenses and have that incorporated in?
I think our client doesn't really care how they obtain it. Only that they obtain it. It's obtained legally. And the samples are legit. And as such, in terms of viewing the expenses, I don't think it's necessary. Maybe the best spot to go forward is dealing with up front what we want to, so that we can cover some of these initial expenses, even before you've brought any samples to the table.
Okay, so, well, in terms of splitting those two, without going into any details, obviously there's no need for you to know about all those methods. If you are wanting to obtain the 16 samples from each of the 7 different animal species, just in terms of the raw expenses, that is the travel and acquisition costs, Mr. Dundee has estimated that would be to the sum of €200,000 as the expenses for that part. And that, of course, obviously doesn't include the shipping costs that you alluded to earlier.
Those are his expenses.
Those is expenses.
Does that include what he puts into his pocket after?
No.
They're limited to the travel and acquisition costs. So this is why we thought it best to, at least in principle, separate to start with expenses and remuneration. Expenses being what Mr. Dundee would be required to invest out of his own pocket, or rather putting out of his own pocket if he wasn't paid up front, purely to cover the cost of his flights to get to the different continents that the animals he require come from, and to cover the actual acquisition costs that he would need to pay suppliers to obtain the sources in any legal manner possible for the purposes.
Is there any more detailed breakdown of those expenses you can give at all? Or is that just sort of a basic figure?
I know we originally said that it's not really of interest, but looking at that number, it's somewhat higher than what we'd expected. Sure, you can understand our client operates a business at budgets. There's an investment, a serious investment in dollars. We set budgets on it. That budget is far too high for what our client is. So,
well, as I
obviously,
mentioned
we've got
before,
concerns.
certainly.
You've done something wrong.
As I mentioned before, those costs themselves are fixed, but what Mr. Dundee has done is sort of given us an upper and a lower limit within the range, depending on how many different animal species you wanted to collect and how many different samples. So at the lower end of the range, what he's given us is for a bare majority of the species, so for 4 species, and 1 from each. That would be to the tune of €50,000. So of course we can move between those two, depending on where perhaps you may want to cut down on samples or on animals. I guess just flagging now, the more expensive part of the acquisition process is actually between the different species, because of course that requires going to different continents, contacting different suppliers, whereas the samples themselves, while they will make some difference to the price, are much more the smaller part of that package.
I actually think we're seeing eye to eye, but what we're going to suggest is a different way of looking at the payment structure. I think the numbers are actually a little closer than I think.
Perhaps that may be a good way forward. I mean, you have mentioned you have a specific payment strategy in mind, so maybe if you could outlay that for us and we could let you know any concerns or questions we have about that.
Sure. Essentially, our payment plan has some We can start with an upfront payment of $20,000 for Mr. Dundee. We wouldn't want him to feel that he'd have to be out of pocket when he starts to work on his contract, and it's important for our client that he feels that he's being compensated right from the start. From there on in, for each sample that he gains, we're getting $1,000 per sample on each element.
This is all.
Is this all expenses or are we talking remuneration as
This
well?
is remuneration. They remember how we wanted to focus on separating expenses? So this payment includes all expenses.
All expenses and the remuneration for his skills, or just the expenses?
This is the overall budget.
Okay, great. And in terms of that 1,000 per sample, how much would be attributable to, his skill, and how much do you envisage it costs to obtain each sample?
We're definitely not done yet because the 1,000. I think the key to this is the bonus structure that we have. Because like we said, one of our goals is biodiversity.
Okay.
So we do have a bonus structure based on those majority, which was for getting all 7 of these species. So.
We'll be able to continue upon collecting one sample at minimum from 4 different animals. Mr. Dundee will receive a $10,000 bonus. 4 different species.
So one sample for 4 different species, you're still maintaining €1,000 per species, but there would be a bonus.
And that was $10,000.
I noticed you said that was a per annum arrangement, and the work's to be completed within a year. Do you envisage the project may actually continue beyond that first year?
If Mr. Dundee could, or if you could express to us maybe how far beyond the project. If this is achieved within roughly a year, our client has a serious interest in continuing this process in the future.
And we do have a bonus in the end to set up once we achieve that within that year. So.
So there was one bonus payable there, and then the second bonus is at the end, or do you have a
No,
bonus
no, we
structure
don't.
before that? Okay.
There's another bonus after the 6th species of animal is collected. It's 9 once Mr. Dundee gets the 5th and 6th species of animal, 1 sample from each at minimum, could receive another $10,000 bonus. Finally, once all 7 species have been collected, our client has put a $15,000 bonus in place.
So from that 6th, once it becomes that 7,
And is that again at least one sample range? Or?
one sample of each place.
That was 15,000.
Now, an additional form of compensation that we've established for our client is in the interest of, again, creating diversity among the samples that are taken. Each time that Mr. Dundee gets 5 different samples from different animal species, so it can be 1 from 5 different animal species, he'll receive a $3,000 bonus.
Sorry, could you repeat that one? 5 different samples from 5 different species. So
Yes. So now we've achieved the 7 different types of species. Now we're looking at getting multiple samples
So
from
that's
different
5
animals.
moving
within
5.
those. Yeah.
And the figure there was
3,000.
Is that, I understand we're drawing this.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
It does make sense. It's just keeping track of the figures as we go through. It's making sense.
There's one final bonus that's in place, and if Mr. Dundee is able to collect, as we said, there's 112 samples potentially to be obtained, at least at this point. Again, in the future there could be more animals to be looked at. If Mr. Dundee can collect all 112 of those within the 1-year period, we'd be happy to give him a $15,000 bonus.
So just to summarize what we have is 20,000 here. That should cover a lot of these initial expenses. We are paying on a per sample basis, so we will, so as you bring in samples, we will be paying to cover some of the expenses that go from the area itself.